They told you it's burnout, and they lied. It's nurse trauma. Your body never lied. The system did. I'm Dr. Lorre Laws. Let's get into it. This week, 3 nurses did something that I have waited years to see, and none of them have been in practice longer than 18 months. By the end of this episode, you will know the difference between burnout and nurse-specific trauma well enough that no wellness module will ever fool you again. You'll understand why your body stores what you push through, and why you hear 3 brand new messages from nurses who figured out the truth faster than the system could train them. Here's what's happened. A professor, let's call her Dr. R, reached out to me. She teaches a special topics course in an RN to BSN program, and she assigned her students a simple task. Take Dr. Lorre's free nurse-specific trauma assessment, and then reflect and write about what you found. Now, before we go on, she did get permission from each of those students to share their stories here, and hers as well. And she sent me what they wrote. 3 early career nurses, all within 16 to 18 months of licensure. And reading their words, I had to stop and do my own reflection because they recognized it in real time before the profession broke them the way that it has broken generations of nurses before them. So no matter how many years you have in practice, this episode is for you. What these 3 early career nurses saw, you have lived. And the difference is they got the words for it early. Let me give you a backdrop first, because it's important to understand why this is such a big deal. For years, I have talked about the 4 forces converging on nurses and our profession all at the same time. The staffing crisis, nurses being stretched past human capacity, the sickness, and the suffering. These 4 forces are all pressing on the same nervous system at one time. And that's before you even clock in. And the numbers underneath those forces are not subtle. 96% of nurses carry at least one PTSD symptom, not burnout, trauma. And nearly 25% of all nurses meet the full diagnostic criteria for PTSD. So that's how the 4 forces are showing up. But this week, I saw a nuance of these forces, and it's one that the system did not plan for. The next generation of nurses is starting to see through the veil of burnout deception while they're still new to the profession, not after a decade, not after 20 years, not after they've already been broken, now, while they still have the language and the tools to do something about it. This is the 5th force, an informed generation. And the system has no defense against a nurse who knows the difference between burnout and trauma on day 1. Now, let me read you some of what these 3 nurses actually wrote, because this is the heart of it. The first student wrote about losing a patient that she had grown close to. In her words, in that moment, she did not have time to process the emotional trauma of losing someone she had grown to love. She had to focus on her task, get the job done. And looking back, she saw that she had set her own feelings aside to be there for her patients, the way she thought a strong nurse should. Then she wrote a line that really made me pause and reflect. She said that the reaction was not just to commitment and endurance. It was the symptom of a broader failure to make sure that nurses are given what they need to cope with the emotional demands of their work. An early career nurse, not even in their 2nd year of practice, is discussing a broader failure of the system. Not her failure, the system's failure, written by a nurse barely out of her orientation. And what she is describing is something real and physical. When you hit the override button on trauma exposure, that trauma does not disappear. It goes unprocessed. It gets stored in the body. You might keep moving through your daily tasks, but your body is keeping and holding that score in the fascia, in the muscles, in the nerve bundles, and it stays there until conditions are favorable for healing, which is what my work centers on. Pushing through is not healing. It's stuffing and storing. That's how trauma works. Gabor Mate defines trauma as what happens inside of you as a result of what happens outside of you. And nurses are not getting help for what happens on the inside. And here's why. More than 36% of nurses report a stigma tied to asking for mental health care. And the stigma is just a part of it. In 30 states, nursing license boards still ask invasive questions about a nurse's mental health. And 22 of those states require nurses to disclose past diagnoses. I had to really sit with what that means. A nurse is not avoiding help because he or she or they are weak. They are avoiding it because the board that controls their license is weaponizing mental health and can punish them. If the board does not like the answers submitted, they can lose the career that they went in, most likely student loan debt, to build. That's the game. Instill fear right out of the gate. So if you have stayed silent, you are not weak. You are doing the math the system set up for you to do. And that is exactly why the next thing I want to tell you about is not another wellness module. No more resilience theater. What I'm doing is a free masterclass on the real difference between burnout and nurse-specific trauma and the science that was actually built for your nervous system. 3 times to choose from at the end of June, and registration is at drlorelaws.com/masterclass. I will give you everything you need at the end of this episode. So let's return. The first student saw the wound. The second student named the mechanism. He wrote about his clinical rotations, said that he felt emotionally exhausted and unable to be empathetic with patients who had complex chronic conditions. The sheer rate of seeing people that sick or in mental health crisis led to fatigue and detachment. And then he identified it correctly. He said that the pattern lines up with the compassion fatigue and secondary traumatic stress, and that seeing what is happening through the lens of nurse-specific trauma helped him understand that those responses, his reactions, well, they were systemic and cumulative and by no means a personal weakness. Systemic and cumulative, not a personal weakness. A nurse with barely a year in practice wrote that with more clarity than this profession has managed to do in half a century. And here's the part that should make you up in your feels, maybe even a little angry. Researchers recently published a scoping review to find trauma interventions that were specific for the nurse role. They screened nearly 8,000 records. And do you know how many usable intervention studies they found for nurses? 6. 6 studies. Meanwhile, the military trauma intervention literature is so large that it has its own meta-analysis. I could wallpaper your house with those studies. ICU nurses and other types of clinical specialties have the same trauma exposures as combat military personnel, same nervous system, and a glaring bias in whose pain got studied. And that gap is exactly why I'm here. The first student saw this wound, and the second student named the mechanism. The third student that I will tell you about now named the whole thesis in just 4 sentences. She wrote that she now sees what nurses go through is more than just feeling overwhelmed. It's a form of trauma. And the first step for caring for ourselves is to acknowledge that. Not just being tired, not just being stressed, dealing with the emotional toll of the job. That is my work in one beautifully written paragraph, written by someone the profession has not yet had the time to convince otherwise. So let me say this quiet part out loud. For 50 years, the profession handed nurses the wrong word, burnout. A word that puts the problem inside of you, your resilience, your coping, your failure to bounce back. A word that sends you to a wellness model instead of the truth. And the institutions are not neutral here. Even the World Health Organization is serving the burnout Kool-Aid. They declassified burnout as a medical condition in the ICD-11. In one move, that shifts the entire burden and cost onto the nurse instead of onto the employer responsible for those working conditions. Then they doubled down on their definition. They call burnout syndrome as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. Not successfully managed by whom? By you, the nurse. That is gaslighting, written into the official guidelines by the World Health Organization. Now, 3 students here that are 6 to 18 months into practice could see clearly what the World Health Organization refuses to see, what most healthcare organizations still refuse to acknowledge or address. So where does this leave us? The good news is real. Nurses do not have to drink the burnout Kool-Aid anymore. We have the science. We have the middle range theory. And when nurses start actually nourishing the nervous system and the mitochondria, the 2 systems that get locked in survival mode, profound shifts happen. Transformative ones, life-changing ones. Think about what this means. If 3 nurses barely out of school can recognize their trauma and start to heal it, imagine what becomes possible when the nurse with 15, 20, or even 25 years of wisdom finally gets the right diagnosis and the right tools. You are not behind. You have more to draw on, not less. This is the thing the system stole, and the thing we are taking back. And that's our power, the safety of our nervous system and our cells, our professional well-being, because the body keeps the score that the system refuses to keep. These 3 students learned to read that score and act on it, and you can too. It's not too late. If your body has been sending up flares, that's not a weakness. That's information that your nervous system, your cells, are asking you to finally do this work. So here's what I want to leave you with. I am hosting a free interactive masterclass for nurses who are done being told to do better self-care and sit through one more wellness module. In the masterclass, I show you the real difference between burnout and nurse-specific trauma, and why every resilience workshop you've ever sat through was aimed at the wrong target, and the recovery science that was actually built for your nervous system and your cells. There are 3 times to choose from. We have June 30th, July 1st, and July 2nd, and various times of the day. These master classes run for about 90 minutes with plenty of times for conversation and getting your questions answered. It is open to everyone. Every license level, every specialty, students and faculty, all are welcome. So please register at drlorelaws.com/masterclass. And if this episode identifies something that you have carried for a long time, please share it with a friend and tell me which of these students sounded the most like you in your first year. If you reach out on social media or email, I read and respond to every response. So, in closing, The next live masterclass will not run again for several months. If you can squeeze it into your calendar, do so. Your nervous system has waited long enough. I'm Dr. Lorre Laws. Your body never lied. The system did. From my healer's heart to yours, and until next time, namaste.